everyone. I am today going to be doing a review of The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I am pretty late to the party on this book. I'm usually 2 or 3 years behind everyone else on the internet when it comes to books, but this was really good, and I just want to tell everybody what my thoughts are about this. It is very thick. So, this is an epic fantasy that is, in some ways, a retelling of the myth of King George and the dragon. It's got influences from Elizabethan history, the history of feudal Japan. There's a very strong religious element to this. It's a fascinating fantasy read. The mythology of this world is that 1,000 years prior to the beginning of the story of the novel, this great dragon called the Nameless One emerged from the center of the earth and was wreaking havoc all over the world. The story takes place in a few different places. It begins it begins in this place called Nice, which is an analog of England during the Elizabethan era. Their belief system is called virtuedom, where they have saints who are really their deities. And the founder of this religion, 1,000 years ago, during the grief of ages, they believe he threw the Nameless One, the great dragon, into the abyss, and he married this woman, Cleolind, who was a princess from the south that had a different religion, which I think is an analog of Islam. But anyway, they got married and they started the line of the Queendom of Nice. Nice is a matriarchal society. They've had nothing but queens for 1,000 years. Each queen only has one daughter, and apparently they all look alike. They all have black hair and bright green eyes. And when the book begins, it is the reign of Queen Sabran the Ninth. She's still unmarried, still yet to produce an heir, so her position as the queen is precarious. And she has a chambermaid called Yad, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. And she is actually part of a holy order from the south, the southern continent, called the Priory of the Orange Tree. She's there in secret to guard Sabran because the Priory believes that Sabran's family bloodline is the only thing that's stopping the Nameless One from re-emerging. Her people have a different belief than virtuedom. They believe that the saint was actually cowardly. In fact, this is actually revealed to be the truth. The saint was very cowardly, and the woman he married, or the woman they believe he married, named Cleolind, whom they called the Maiden, was the one who actually slew the Nameless One. So Iad is part of this holy order. She is guarding Sabran. The assassins start coming for Sabran. They're not quite sure why. They think it's to scare her into finally getting married and securing the next generation of rulers. There's also another point of view character called Loth. He's the heir to a lordship. He's Sabran and Iad's friend, and he gets sent to another kingdom, or he's exiled by one of the very powerful lords at court. He gets sent to a kingdom which has sworn allegiance to the Nameless One, and the world building in this is really interesting. When you go to that kingdom, I forget the exact name of it, but there's these wyverns and basilisks and all these draconic demonic creatures. The land in that kingdom is very desolate and burnt. Um, and it turns out that the king is actually being controlled, possessed by one of the High Westerlings. These are the high-ranking dragons who are second in command to the Nameless One, and it's on his Loth on his boat ride over to this kingdom. He sees Firadel, who's one of the most powerful dragons, and says that the Nameless One is returning. Then in the other part of the world, in part of a world called a country called Seek, we have our other storyteller. Actually, we have two storytellers from there. Tane, who is an orphan, and she's just been accepted into the Sea Guard, which is this order of dragon riders. Now, in the West, in Virtuedom, dragons are demonic, they're evil, but in the East, which have, their dragons are serpentine, like Chinese dragons, they're holy, they're gods. So Tanai gets chosen to ride one of the dragons, which is the highest honor in her country. But the night before she gets chosen, she sees a Westerner coming onto the beach. He's shipwrecked. He's swimming onto the beach. She helps him, which is against the law. They are not supposed to help Westerners. But she has a friend of hers take him to the other, and the fourth and final storyteller in this, Niklaus Roos, who is a surgeon from a kingdom called Mentendun. He's got exiled. He used to be in the court of Sabran, and he told her that he could create the elixir of life to make her immortal, but he was unable to do that, so he got exiled. The real plot of this is that the Nameless One is returning, and they need to, Virtuedom and the East need to unite to defeat him, to bind him, throw him back into the abyss, hopefully kill him forever. But the problem with that is that the East and the West don't communicate. They have different religious beliefs. Obviously, like I just said, the East worships dragons. The West thinks dragons are evil. One of the things that I found interesting about this book was the religious aspect of it, because the West's beliefs in the saints are what unifies them. It's what gives them a sense of solidarity, and it gives them a sense of feeling protected, but it's also what's keeping them from doing what's necessary, because in order to unite with the other nations of the world to fight the Nameless One, they have to acknowledge that what they believe in isn't exactly correct. And you see that both in the terms of the nations and in terms of the characters, because Iad, she strongly believes in the Priory of the Orange Tree and what it's fighting for, but later in the novel, she sees that maybe the Priory's intentions aren't so noble, not as pure, so she has to reckon with that. She has to reckon with her beliefs, her spiritual beliefs, and what she as an individual believes is right, and her loyalties to those who are close to her. And those kind of character conflicts are always what makes novels great when done well, and it's done very well here. Like another example of that was with Tane. Wants to serve her country as a dragon rider, but she has to lie about helping a Westerner enter her country in order to do that, in order to live out her dreams, and she has to face consequences for that later. Taunai is actually my favorite character in this. She's an orphan, so she's clawed her way up from nothing and achieved this great position. And just when she gets there, she's taken down a peg, and she has to spend the rest of the novel trying to reclaim her glory. Niklaus Roos is like that. He's old. He's got a lot of grief. He's got a lot of regrets. He's very world weary. he is self-interested. He starts off as being the most selfish character in the book, but he actually winds up committing some acts of great heroism later. Sabran, the queen, she she's torn between duty to her country as monarch and her own desires. And, at some point in the novel, she suffers a great loss and it affects her ability to be queen. And, Eid has to pull her back up. It's her relationship with Eid. The relationship between Eid and Sabran winds up being uh, a romantic relationship. This is very much a feminist novel. Sabran is queen. Her country has had nothing but queens for 1,000 years, so sexism is not really a thing in this, and that's part of a very interesting debate when you're talking about how gender is portrayed in speculative fiction. Because if it's a wholly new world and you can decide what the rules are, you know, do you just want to do what Samantha Shannon does and create a world where sexism isn't a thing? Or another example of that, or a different, the opposite example of that is George R. R. Martin in A Song of Ice and Fire, where some parts of the world are patriarchal, misogynistic, and others aren't. Like, for example, in the second book, Clash of Kings, when Catelyn Stark sees Brienne for the first time, she says, uh, "There's nothing as sad as an ugly woman." And yes, that is a misogynistic thing to say, but it makes sense for Caitlin to think that because she has been raised in a misogynistic society. But when we go to Dorne, which is a more egalitarian society, less rigid, things are different there, and that makes it interesting seeing that clash of cultures of different ideas. And that's one way to explore racism and sexism in fantasy, or you can do what Samantha Shannon does, and you can just create a world where those things don't exist, because you see characters in the Priory of the Orange Tree who are of different races interacting, but the racial prejudice is not there. Like, there's tension between the East and the West, but it's not really based on ethnicity. It's more based on culture and on spiritual beliefs. The world here is very well built. The cultures are very distinct and very lived in. I just loved how much traveling we do, how many different countries we see. Everything is so well described in this visually, from the clothes characters are wearing, but the descriptions aren't over the top. Like George R. R. Martin really lay it on, but she's doing this. She's got a good balance with this. In some ways, it is a slow novel. It is 800 pages, and one complaint I've heard is that this big grand final battle gets resolved too quickly, and I can see that, but I think you also, throughout the novel, you have a lot of these big exciting moments that are building up to it. So I didn't mind that it only, the final battle is only takes like 2 chapters, so that was fine. And yeah, overall, I just really enjoyed this. I love, all the characters are very nuanced. They have very distinct personalities. Um, it's so good. I think it's kind of a good missing link between Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, where there is this court intrigue in the Priory of the Orange Tree, in the Priory where Ede is, and in Sabran's court trying to figure out who is trying to kill her. And you've got, like with Tane, there's this clash of ambition, and Nicklaus, he's a very morally ambiguous character, but you've got that, but you've also got this primordial battle with, like you had in Lord of the Rings, between the forces of good and the forces of evil. So it's a good mix of those things. Uh, I really enjoyed it. I'm really glad I read this. Um, there's a prequel to this, The Day of Fallen Night, which I will read eventually. I don't know when because I've got a big TBR pile, but yeah, that's all I have to say about the Priory of the Orange Tree. I highly recommend this. It's very good. Thank you for watching. Bye.